Maybe you read the obituary yesterday. Evil, that's spelled E-V-E-L, Evel Knievel is dead. Evel Knievel was a stuntman extraordinaire, famous in the 60s for dressing in his star-spangled jumpsuit and jumping over, well, nearly everything. When he was 27, he became the co-owner of a motorcycle shop. To attract customers, he announced that he would jump his motorcycle 40 feet over parked cars and a box of rattlesnakes and continue on past a mountain lion tethered at the other end. Never mind about animal rights. He did so, he did all these things as promised, but he fell short of his goal and came down on the rattlesnakes. The audience was in awe, said the New York Times. There was no report from the rattlesnakes. He jumped over the fountains at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas in 1968, a stunt which put him in a coma for a month. That could have been the end of his story, and his obituary should have been written in 1974 after he tried to jump 1,600 feet across Idaho's Snake River Canyon, and his parachute opened prematurely. But no, he died last Friday at the age of 69 of natural causes, having suffered almost 40 broken bones during the course of his career. He was forced to retire in 1980 when he told reporters that he had become, and I quote, nothing but scar tissue and surgical steel. Was Evel Knievel a man of courage? Well, he said of himself, I'm a guy who is, first of all, a businessman. He said, I'm not a stuntman, I'm not a daredevil, and he paused, I'm an explorer. Well, yes, it's very interesting. There are all kinds of courage in this world. There's this sheer physical courage like that of Evel Knievel. The courage to climb a difficult peak or to ski on a challenging slope. Perhaps this is a way of saying to death, hey, I know you're there and I'm not afraid. I'm going to meet you face to face. You are living absolutely in the moment, absorbed with the challenge of just existing, and there's a kind of exhilaration that comes with this kind of extreme sport, I'm told. I'm an explorer. So Evel Knievel says, I'm an explorer. How far can I go? What are the limits of the human body, the human spirit? Now, in preparing this sermon, I had to think about, who are the people in my life who have given me courage? And I had to go no further than the door of my refrigerator, on which I put up the obituaries of people who have lived lives of courage, people who inspire me. In fact, the working title of my sermon was, Dead People on My Fridge. But then I thought, that sounds a little too much like the title of a horror film, like Dead People in My Fridge. So I changed the title to They Have Given Me Courage. Well, who are all these people on my fridge? Well, I'll tell you about some of them. All right, number one is Elvis Presley. Okay. I still have that now very faded obituary. I think it was 1977. Elvis died of an overdose. Now, Elvis had abused his body and his brain. His closest relationships were in shambles much of the time. And in spite of his charisma and his personal beauty and his talent, Elvis often felt angry and inadequate and profoundly depressed. So, Marilyn, why have you chosen him, as you might say, as somebody who has given you courage? Well, because in spite of it all, he was his own person and he went his own way. Elvis was from working class roots. His father was a tenant farmer who spent some time in jail for writing a bad check. Elvis grew up listening to Southern church music, to blues, to black gospel, and to country music, and he put them all together. And he dared to move his body, catching the repressed sexuality of the 50s and giving us rock and roll. he dared. In one of his earliest appearances, probably at some place like the Louisiana Hayride, he came out on the stage, and before he did anything, he spit on the floor. Well, an onlooker later reported, "That's when I knew that something very different was about to happen here." Now, when he was asked by the recording studio that was considering making his first record, "Who do you sound like?" Elvis responded, "I don't sound like nobody." And he didn't. And that's why Elvis gives me courage. It's not easy to not sound like nobody but yourself. And I want to do that. Another singer and really bad boy who is on my fridge is Johnny Cash. His New York Times obit called him the poet-songwriter of the working class. Johnny Cash knew what it meant to suffer poverty, to be rejected as a child. He was an alcoholic, big time, and addicted to drugs for a while. But he turned his life around due to June Carter and Jesus. He was the only singer I know who consistently sang in prisons, and his Folsom Prison album has to be one of the great all-time albums that has ever been cut. He was in constant pain in the last years of his life because of a surgical operation on his mouth, and he refused to take painkillers because he was afraid that he would become addicted again. He said that the only time he was not aware of pain was when he was performing. He was one of my heroes. He turned his pain into gain, and he loved the least of these, as the scripture admonishes all of us to do. Now, looking through my faded pages of obits, I saw that I had Philip Berrigan, who died in December of 2002. He and his brother Daniel were priests who were on the edge war protesters during the Vietnam conflict. Many Americans saw them as communists and traitors. Young Philip became passionately involved in civil rights and anti-war activities after the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and he found himself frequently in trouble with his superiors in the Catholic Church and even with the law. He served 2 prison terms for his anti-war activity. And while in prison, he prayed and he wrote. Here's one of the things that he said. He said, "The gospel that the church preaches," and this would not be limited to the Catholic Church, "the gospel the church preaches," he said, "is a precise statement of the life it leads, a degenerate stew of behavioral psychology, affluent ethics, and cultural mythology seasoned by nationalist politics." Yeah. He eventually fell in love with a nun, and in a ceremony without witnesses, the two declared themselves husband and wife. They legalized their marriage in 1973, and the two were excommunicated. In 2001, the premiere of a documentary about Berrigan was shown, but he couldn't be there because he was in Ohio in prison on charges of interference with a weapons system. He was 77 years old at the time. Philip Berrigan never stopped speaking truth to power. He knew that there's a difference between what is legal and what is moral. He kept going until he was all used up. He's another of my heroes.